I'm a receptionist at a plastic surgeon's. My boss is stalking me. Several months passed after my encounter with Dr. Harrison and the understanding that Mr. Sinclair negotiated between us. In that time, things finally settled back into their regular routine. The patients at the clinic continued to come in for appointments, and they demanded to be serviced immediately by Dr. Harrison. And thanks to Wilson and his effective security, we no longer had any issues of patients trying to leap over the reception desk to try and kill me for simply telling them no. Rachel also let up on her bitchiness, but it did seep out at times. The biggest issue continued to be with Dr. Harrison, however. For 2 months after the discussion he had with Mr. Sinclair, James acted like a scolded child, pouting and avoiding eye contact with me. In those 2 months, he probably said a single word to me, which was thanks, after I had given him his usual order of coffee. It began to bother me just how quiet he'd become, and after the beginning of the 3rd month of his near-total silence towards me, I decided to confront him about it. I had arrived at work early like I always did, happy to see Wilson at his usual post at the front door. I had made sure that today would be one of the days that Dr. Harrison wouldn't need another skin transplant that day. Usually, he was in a terrible mood when his faux skin began to peel away and required urgent replacement. Seeing I was now aware of his condition, I was allowed to know when it usually needed replacement. I sat down in my chair and anxiously stared at the clock, waiting for Dr. Harrison to arrive, the whole time trying to ignore the concerning noises emanating from the lost and found box. Ever since I discovered the strange bread creature that enjoys taking things from it, I did my best to try and pretend that it didn't exist. I'd rather not look at its several eyeballs all looking back at me. It usually takes anything shiny, from the lost and found, so I try to keep those things at the top of the box and allow it to simply take whatever it wants to who knows where. Dr. Harrison soon arrived on time, looking as dejected as he always did nowadays. I clenched my fist tightly as I gathered the courage to confront him over his behavior. Standing up from my desk, I left the receptionist area and quickly intercepted him before he could enter the back of the clinic. "Dr. Harrison, I need to talk to you." I blocked his way from the entrance to the back where the surgery rooms and the consultation rooms are. He looked down at me with his bright green eyes, and it was obvious that he didn't want to talk to me. He grimaced at me and was clearly contemplating just pushing me out of the way. "You can't just keep ignoring me and acting like a child, James," I told him, feeling more like a mother disciplining her annoying child than a receptionist. Though I guess that's exactly what I was doing at that moment. "What else am I supposed to do, Maggie? The only reason you're still here is that you're paid to still be here. How do you expect me to feel after what happened at the coffee shop, and after Mr. Sinclair made it clear that I was already acting like a child in his eyes? It's better for the both of us if I just keep ignoring you." He put his hands on me and started trying to move me out of the way, but I kept myself firmly planted in front of him. "Sir, you're acting like a child," I told him again, "and that's why you get treated like a child by everyone. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way things were. I'm only asking that you at least make an effort to try and move forward with things, and to at least try and act like you want to be here." I sighed as I stared at him. Despite knowing it wasn't his true face, I couldn't help but deny how beautiful he was, and those hypnotic green eyes were still the prettiest I had ever seen. I reached out and touched his face, and that caused him to flinch. "Please, at least try to be better," I asked him. He stared at me with those big green eyes, and I watched as they went down to my hands on his cheek. And to my surprise, a soft red hue began to appear on his face. He reached his hand to touch mine, but before he could, I pulled my hand away and gave him the best smile I could. I was only doing this to snap him out of his tantrum. At this point, I'm honestly wishing I had let him keep up the tantrum. The rest of the day played out as it normally did. Rachel came in soon after Dr. Harrison did, and we opened up the clinic to a flood of patients. The patients at Dr. Harrison's clinic are the main issue besides the surgeon himself. They are fanatics when it comes to getting their cosmetic surgery, and the ones addicted to it are always hounding me, Listen, you fat pig. I need to see Dr. Harrison right now. These crow's feet are disgusting and need them removed now. An older woman shouted at me, shoving her bony finger in my face. I cleared my throat and looked over at Wilson, who was already eyeing the patient like a hawk. As I've already told you, ma'am, Dr. Harrison is booked up completely for the next 6 months. Now I can book you an appointment sometime after. Those 6 months and have you on a waiting list in case someone cancels their appointment, which has never happened in all of my time of being here. Does that sound okay? No, that doesn't sound okay. I need to see him now. The woman screamed at me, and everyone else behind her also shouted and screamed along with her. Before I could look to Wilson to try and get him to do something, the woman had reached out and grabbed me by the hair and started yanking on it. Ma'am, please try to control yourself, I shouted at her, grabbing at her hands in an attempt to pry them off of my hair. Before she could do anything else to me, she suddenly let go of my hair. I looked up to see that Wilson had grabbed her by her hair and was now holding her a good foot off the ground. Are you okay, Maggie? He asked with genuine concern on his face. Wilson is a good security guard, and he does seem to really care. For me. He isn't the smartest cookie, being that he's some strange blob creation from Dr. Harrison, but he's a good guy, all things considered. I'm okay, thank you, Wilson. I smiled and fixed my hair from the mess that the woman had caused for me. Suddenly, I felt someone standing behind me. Turning in my chair, I was surprised to see that Dr. Harrison was suddenly behind me. He should have been mid-surgery, and yet, all of a sudden, he was right here. His surgical mask covered his mouth, and his eyes shone with anger at the woman Wilson was holding like a prized fish. What's going on here? He asked, pulling his mask down to reveal an upset frown on his beautiful face. The woman was almost instantly pacified after looking at Dr. Harrison, and she stopped flailing around trying to escape Wilson's vice-like grip on her hair. Dr. Harrison's hypnotic eyes had almost everyone in the waiting room in a trance. She grabbed at my hair. I tried to explain to her that you're booked up completely for 6 months. I explained to him, being the only one that wasn't currently in a trance around him. Thanks to the fact I had a positive opinion of myself and a strong sense of self-worth, Dr. Harrison's hypnosis was ineffective to me, only causing me intense headaches if I stared at his eyes for too long. I see, he said with his eyes narrowing as he stared at the woman who Wilson was still holding up. Wilson, see her out, and never let her back in. Wilson diligently nodded and carried the woman effortlessly to the door to the clinic. The woman didn't say so much as a peep as Wilson tossed her out like a bag of trash. Sir, we're in the middle of a surgery, Rachel shouted as she poked her head out of one of the ORs. Dr. Harrison looked back at her and seemed to suddenly remember what it was that he had been doing before coming out here to check on the ruckus. Right. At ease, everyone, he ordered the patients before quickly pulling his mask back over his mouth and sparing a glance at me. I met his glance and saw that the same red hue suddenly came over his face as he quickly walked away back to the surgery he'd so abruptly left. That scene wasn't something new to me. I counted it a good day if only 4 patients attacked me like that woman did. It had been a lot worse before we got Wilson to act as security. But this was the first time since getting Wilson that Dr. Harrison had come out to see what the commotion had been. At around lunchtime, the patients had finally settled down and were either waiting for their appointment or filling out various forms that needed signing. I looked over at the clock on the wall and leaned back in my chair to give myself a stretch before standing up. Just as I finally stood up from my chair, I noticed Rachel staring at me from the other side of the counter. What did you say to him? She asked me. Rachel is the nurse at the clinic and as usual a frigid, cold bitch. But after I learned from Dr. Harrison that she had originally been overweight before meeting him and having one of his surgeries, she'd been more amicable to me, though her bitchiness still leaked through at times. What do you mean? I asked her as I picked up my bag from the car and started searching for my car keys in it. To Dr. Harrison? I asked, opening my bag and starting to search more diligently for my suddenly missing car keys. Yeah, he seems happier than the past 2 months. He actually started to make conversation with me again. Rachel crossed her arms and leaning against the counter of the reception desk. "What did you say to him?" she asked me again, squinting. Her eyes at me. "I just told him to stop acting like such a child." I shrugged at her, as I was about to dump out the contents of my bag and start searching that way. "Where the hell?" Before I could ask the question, I noticed burnt bread, crumbs at the bottom of my bag. Oh, son of a bitch, that thing took my keys. I groaned, looking around on the floor for any evidence of the bread creature. "I highly doubt that's what put him in a good mood," she said, a smile crossing her face as she watched me search around for my keys and the bread thief. "How's dummy treating you? Better be worth it to have the waiting room this cold." She was talking about Wilson. We keep the waiting room quite cold to ensure that Wilson doesn't melt and cause another rampage. Stop calling him that. Just 'cause he's a little slow doesn't make him dumb. I scolded Rachel as I got down on my hands and knees and began searching for the creature. I noticed a trail of crumbs that started from where my purse had been and led out into the back rooms. "Damn it," I muttered to myself. "He doesn't have any feelings, not like I can hurt them." "Right, Wilson?" she asked him, looking over towards him as he scanned the waiting room like the diligent hawk he was. Upon hearing his name, he smiled and waved at the two of us. "You stop making fun of me and move on to him? Do you have anything else going on in your life, Rachel?" I asked as I stood up from the floor and sighed, placing all the items I had pulled out of my bag back into it. Rachel tisked at me and flipped me off as she made her way back to the ORs and consultation rooms. Just as I was about to go hunt down the bread creature for my keys, I heard jingling behind me. Turning around, I was surprised to see Dr. Harrison standing there with my keys. "Seems that our little friend tried to make off with these," he said with a smile as he handed me the keys. "Are you heading out to lunch now?" He had made a complete 180 in his emotions. He went from a sad, pouting child to a seemingly energetic puppy. "Thank you, sir, and yes, I am." "Would you like your normal coffee order?" I asked, clutching my keys for fear of the bread creature appearing and taking them again. He nodded quickly at me and I smiled back at him. It felt good to see him no longer sulking around. I left the clinic and made my way to the coffee shop that I always visited for lunch. "Hey, Maggie." The barista, Philip, greeted me upon my entrance. I smiled back at him and waved hello. He's an absolute sweetheart who always knows exactly how to make my order exactly how I like it. "You want your usual?" he asked, already in the process of steaming the milk for my latte. "Yes, please, if you could, Phil." I smiled as I approached the counter and took my wallet out. "Also, get me 3 chocolate croissants, please." He was already way ahead of me and already preparing the bag that he was going to put them into. "Deciding to treat yourself?" "You usually only get 2, he asked as he used the tongs in his hands to test the freshness of the croissants for me. "Well, you don't get this chubby by only having 2 croissants a day." I giggled as I handed him my debit card to pay for the coffees and the croissants. He joined in my laugh fit as he swiped my card and handed it back to me. "Well, I think you look great, as always," he said, as he put the finishing touches on my latte, and then moved over to pour Dr. Harrison's black coffee into a cup. I couldn't help but giggle and blush a little. Philip and I had gotten into the habit of flirting with each other, and I would be lying if I didn't say that. I enjoyed spending time with him every day for lunch. "You look just as good," I told him, as I accepted the drinks and bag of croissants from him. He winked at me, and I waved goodbye to him as I exited out into the parking lot. Arriving back at the clinic and sipping on my latte, I was surprised to see people lined up outside the clinic, muttering and shouting in anger. I tried to push past them to get to the door and noticed that Wilson was standing guard at the door outside. Possibly the first time I'd ever seen him outside of the building. "Hi, Maggie," he said with a smile. "We had a little situation while you were at lunch. One of the patients attacked Rachel." I couldn't help but let out a little gasp at that. Sure, Rachel was a bitch at times, but she had been getting better as of late. and we had even shared a few laughs together. Is she okay? What happened? I asked Wilson. He had to stop someone from rushing past us by grabbing them by the face and nonchalantly pushing them away. You can go inside and look. Dr. Harrison told me to stay here and keep people out till he can fix up the damage on Rachel's face. That wasn't a good sign. If this attack had done damage to Rachel's face, I could only imagine how badly she was taking it. The moment I set foot in the clinic, that fear was confirmed as Rachel was screaming at the top of her lungs in anguish. "Rachel, get a hold of yourself," Dr. Harrison shouted as he tried to keep Rakahel lying down on the clinic floor. "Maggie, thank God, I need you to come over and hold Rachel down." His hair was a mess as he desperately tried to keep Rachel from thrashing around uncontrollably. I quickly nodded and placed the drinks down on a chair in the waiting room. I took Dr. Harrison's place and grabbed Rachel's hands, trying to keep them pinned to the floor despite her kicks and screams. I got a first-hand view of the giant cut across Rachel's cheek. It was deep, to the point that I could see the molars in her mouth. I had to do everything in my power to keep from throwing up on her. "What happened?" I asked Dr. Harrison, as he went through a first aid kit. "I was only gone for 15 minutes. I tried to keep Rachel still, but she was in hysterics, screaming and crying uncontrollably. I didn't know if it was from the pain or from the fact that her face itself had been hurt. She insulted one of the patients, and unfortunately, they had a knife on them." He sighed as he pulled out some surgical thread and a needle from the first aid kit. "Okay, tell Wilson to come inside. I can't keep him in one piece and also hypnotize Rachel at the same time." I quickly nodded and let go of her while Dr. Harrison got to work. Wilson entered and stayed by the door to keep anyone from trying to bash it down. I nervously sipped from my latte as I took my spot back at the reception desk. There wasn't much more for me to do as Dr. Harrison went into the zone to patch Rachel up. It didn't take him long to finish up, and he had Wilson carry her to one of the ORs to recover. Dr. Harrison sighed as he pulled off his surgical gloves and looked over at me. "How'd it go?" I asked him, standing up from my seat and offering him his now lukewarm black coffee. He took it and took a big long sip from it after confirming that it was no longer scalding hot. "She isn't going to be happy. It was a deep cut, and I had to pull her skin back together with the stitches. It isn't going to be pretty. I'll probably just give her cosmetic surgery after it heals." He sighed, brushing his messy hair back into shape, and stared at me for a moment. "What's on your cup?" I raised a brow at him before looking down at the cup and noticing that Philip had written my name with a heart on it. "Oh, that's just from the barista. Me and him like to flirt with each other," I said with a little giggle. As I did so, Dr. Harrison choked on his coffee a little. "Are you all right, sir?" I asked him as he took a moment to catch his voice. "Yay. Fine. Thank you. I have to check on Rachel," he told me quickly before placing his half-full cup of coffee back on my desk and running back to one of the ORs. I was a little confused at his reaction, but simply shrugged. I sat back down in my chair and went about finishing up the paperwork I had left to do. Wilson came back out a short moment later, and he looked concerned about something. "What's the matter, Wilson?" I asked him, eating one of my croissants, carefully so as not to spill too many crumbs. "I just hope Rachel will be okay. I wasn't able to protect her." He was devastated over not being able to stop the attack on Rachel. I reached a hand out and touched his and did my best to reassure him. "You stopped anything worse from happening, Wilson. You're the best security guard we could have here," I told him, and that seemed to cheer him up a bit. He composed himself and went back to his usual post by the door. I began to wonder if we were going to open the clinic back up with Rachel being indisposed. So I headed back into the back rooms and looked around to see which room Dr. Harrison was in. I found the one where Rachel was resting. She was lying on a surgery table and seemingly knocked out. Upon opening the door to the next room, I was met with a horrifying sight. I cracked the door open and had to quickly stop myself from screaming. I watched as Dr. Harrison was straddling a patient and plunging a scalpel over and over into their body. "Flirt? Flirt! Flirt! He shouted over and over again as he stabbed into the body. I covered my mouth with my hands and tried to swallow my scream. She's flirting now. She's mine, he hissed, grabbing the head of the patient, which was being held up by a small strip of flesh. She belongs to me. He hissed at the decapitated head before tossing it as hard as he could against the wall with a splat. In my attempt to keep my mouth covered, the door slowly swung open and interrupted Dr. Harrison in his moment of fury over the patient he was, stabbing over and over. He noticed the door opening, and we met each other's gaze. I stared at him in horror as he dropped his scalpel to the floor along with the body. Maggie! This was the patient who hurt Rachel, he explained, staring at me and then down at the patient. He started approaching me and smiled a little with blood and gore dripping down his face. I was just blowing off some steam, he said with a soft giggle. I turned around and quickly fled before he could get any closer to me. I quickly ran back to the reception area and had to stop myself from screaming and crying. I had simply wanted him to stop acting like a pouting child. But now I was reminded just who my boss truly was. An unhinged, narcissistic murderer. And now, I think, he's growing obsessed with me.